Deputy O'Murphy's lead questioner today is Deputy Murphy.
Thank you, Chair. And with your agreement, we might park the second part of the CNAG statement in relation to the document Mr. Crowley gave us to the end of the meeting, as it relates particularly to the IGB site. Thank you, Ms. Quinlivan, and to your officials for coming in today. What I'd like to do, if I may, is just go through the accounts from 2012 and try and bring them up to speed as to where we are today. And my colleague, Deputy Nash, I think, is going to go into those exceptional items in the CNAG's report on the accounts of 2012. Just a quick question before I begin, because we had some correspondence in today in relation to expense accounts from the authority between 2005 and 2010. Are there any credit cards or expense accounts for the authority today?
I believe there is one credit card, but it's not used. I think since 2010 it has been used for IT licence. That's the only
online software license renewal. We've one expense that goes through it. It's about $100 a year.
And is that a card that you sign off on, Mr. Crowley? Or?
It's a card that you sign off on.
Yeah.
So it hasn't been used for any foreign travel or?
No, there's been no travel since 2009.
Okay. And then are you still able to expense entertainment or food to the authority?
No. There hasn't been any charges since 2010.
Thank you. When the current board was put in place in June 2012, it was estimated, at the time, that it would take 18 months to wind down the authority. So has there been a delay, and if so, why?
Well, we've continued to work to wind down in an orderly fashion, but I suppose there are a number of items that are outside of the control of the authority that need to be put in place in order to affect the dissolution. Firstly, there's legislation required, which is currently, I believe, with the government, and that will have to take its own process, obviously, through the Oireachtas. Secondly, in order to have an alternative fast-track planning system in place, the government designated the North Lutz and Grand Canal as a strategic development zone in December 2012, and there's a statutory procedure that has to be followed to the City Council was designated as a development agency, and they followed the statutory procedure to develop a planning scheme for the SDZ. That was approved by Dublin City Council on the 5th of November last year, and it's currently with Board Pleanála. So those two things need to be in place before the authority can be wound up.
And the legislation, is that the legislation that would, in relation to moving you permanently into Dublin City Council, or what is that legislation?
It's the legislation to dissolve the authority.
Okay. So in your opening statement, when you talked about the work being substantially completed in the first half of 2014, there is no fixed date yet, because it's dependent on legislation and on Board Pleanála ruling on the planning decision.
Yeah.
Okay. And then when you just spoke about, residual issues being transferred to appropriate state bodies, what are those residual issues? Is that things like the lighting and?
Well, if there's any issues outstanding, they would go to the relevant body.
But are we anticipating any outstanding issues at this stage? No. Okay. And then at the moment there is a board, and there's also a community council.
The Docklands Council, yes.
Yeah. So what will happen upon the dissolution of the authority to that board? That board will cease to exist?
Well, I assume so, yes, but that would be a matter for
to be determined by the legislation. Okay. And in terms of where the authority is at the moment, I think there's 15 staff.
No, there's currently two.
Oh, two staff, sorry. Okay, it was 15 in 2012. Okay. And you're currently working in the authority's head offices, is it?
Yeah, I'm seconded part-time from Dublin City Council, and I'm also working in Dublin City Council.
And when the authority then ceases to exist, once the legislation is passed and Board Pleanála has made its ruling, what will happen to the premises there? Because in note 27 of the accounts it says that the authority owns the freehold. Is it anticipated to sell that site or to lease it?
At the moment, I think the intention would be to retain that asset in state ownership.
So would it transfer across to DCC, or?
Again, that depends on the legislation, what assets get transferred to which agency.
Can I ask that point? I mean, have you provided advice on the legislation and what it should or shouldn't contain to the department?
Yes, we provided information when the department requested it.
When did that happen?
That would have happened over the last couple of months.
And so then just if we look at the figures then, we're almost, I mean, I think it's safe to say that we're almost at the point where the authority will no longer exist. So what's its current position in terms of its net value?
I'll hand over to Mr. Crawley.
Yeah, okay.
Just talk about details of the financials.
Deputy, in the accounts that you have in front of you, it shows that the authority has a net asset value of approximately 5 million. So what that means is that if we disposed of everything that's on the balance sheet at that date, there'd be 5 million surplus assets over liabilities as at 2012. We're currently in the process of preparing the 2013 accounts. They're in draft and they haven't been audited yet. On the face of it, it looks like the net asset value is holding it around that level. Okay. So in accounting terms, I suspect it's going to be somewhere in the order of 5 million. And that does not include a number of other assets that we don't record on our balance sheet, which is approximately 3 million euros.
Just that 5 million figure, but that's already taking into account the fact that the pension liability is transferred away.
Correct. Exactly. So that's net of the pension liability.
Pension liability hadn't transferred, the authority would be in deficit.
It would be in deficit, yes.
Okay. Is that including the assets that you don't hold, that you don't count on the books?
Okay. So if on the balance sheet we record approximately 5 million and then approximately 3 million, if you like, off balance sheet. Okay. So that's 8. And then we have transferred an 8 million pension liability back to the state. Okay. Of which about 1.1 million of that will fall due in the next 5 years, and about 50% of it will fall due from about 20 years out.
You count the balance sheet assets that will remain when the authority dissolves, and the assets that are not on the balance sheets. It's looking more like a break-even point of view, is it, for the authority? If you were to take into account the
if you were to take into account the pension, in terms of if you were looking at the state cost, yes, approximately break-even.
Was that pension liability moved too early then?
No, as part of the dissolution of the authority, we needed to address all of the issues on the balance sheet, and we very quickly had entered into discussions with the department in relation to what was going to happen with staffing. Staffing was one of the board's priorities that would be dealt with. Okay, so how the future pension arrangements for deferred pensioners was to be dealt with was taken as a priority. Once the department, in conjunction with the Department of Public Expenditure and Reform, had agreed that the liability was to transfer to the state, the correct accounting treatment was then to discontinue accounting for it in the accounts of the authority. Now we separately disclose it, so the liability is clearly set out on the balance sheet, but then it has an opposite and equal offset, which is effectively showing the state underwriting that, and that has been audited.
Okay, thank you. And then, again, it's an issue for the legislation, as Ms. Quinlan, that the balance that would be, if it is a 5 million surplus, that we just talked about, we haven't yet decided where that would transfer to. That'll be a matter for the legislation.
Yes, and I presume a matter for the department, as the oversight department.
Okay, thank you. So if we look at the 2012 accounts, at the time there was investment assets valued at 22.95 million. But there's been progress made since then. Could you just talk me through the assets that have been sold since that date?
Yeah, please, yeah. Just bear with us for a second. Just correct the point, please. Off the top of my head. Okay, approximately 20 million in value of assets has been disposed of since the balance sheet date.
CHQ, I mean that includes CHQ,
including CHQ, which accounted for 10 million of that.
Yeah. And the other breakdown, I think, was in relation to, I have it here, retail units 2.96, office units 3.4, and car park 4.8. And in terms of the liabilities then, at the end of 2012, were 24.4 million. That figure then has come down.
The bank loan, which was approximately 12 million, that bank loan has now been repaid. Okay. So the remaining liabilities that are on the balance sheet are substantially now intrastate liabilities, Deputy.
Can you explain that?
Monies that are owed to other state agencies. So there's monies owed to the City Council. There's monies owed to NAMA, and there's monies owed to the Railway Procurement Agency.
Okay, and that accounts in total to about 12 million, is it?
Correct.
Okay, and so the asset position is about 2.95 million, the liabilities is about 12 million.
Correct.
Okay, I'm confused on something because in the notes to your accounts, you talked about your capacity to deal with the liabilities rested on the disposal of assets. And how's that going to work out then? How do you square those two figures?
Well, some of the proceeds that we have received, Deputy, are now in cash, so we have substantial cash balances.
Okay.
Okay, so on the asset side of our balance sheet, while we currently have about 8.5 million of assets, by the way, just to reconcile the number for you. We had approximately 23 million at the end of 2012. Okay, we have had sale proceeds of assets around 18 million. That included about 5 million of value higher than we had originally anticipated in 2012. So in other words, we recorded an accounting profit on those. Okay, so we have now approximately 9 million worth of assets on our balance sheet today, which we can sell, with approximately 4 million of cash sitting on our balance sheet, with approximately 3 million of debt receivables sitting on our balance sheet, and then that tots to about 12, and then we've 12 million of liabilities.
Okay.
Sorry, that tots to 17, and then we've 12 million of liabilities. So when you net the two numbers down, you get 5 million.
Okay, thanks. No, that's clear. And in terms of the 9 million assets that are remaining, what are they?
They are some commercial units that we have in the Grand Canal Square area. We have some retail units on the Campshires, and we have a couple of small properties on the north side of the city.
When was the last time valuation was done for them?
The valuation process that we have in the authority, there were a couple of valuations. There's a formal valuation every 3 years. So there was a valuation in 2010, and then there's another one due as of 2013. Each year, when the directors sign off on the accounts, they assess the value of the assets, and sometimes we take informal soundings in the market to see what's going on. So the 8 million that I'm talking about that's still on the balance sheet, that's a combination of market values from 2012 as updated in the market over the last couple of months, plus our own assessment as to what guide price we're putting on those, because we're in the process of selling at the moment. So we have agents engaged with us in the sale of those. So I'd expect that 9 million is probably a fairly hard number, but it is out to formal valuation at the moment.
Out to formal valuation. Okay. Is that part? Sorry, when you're doing that, is that you're doing that because you're moving to sell them at the moment, or just as the process of revaluation you do every 3 years?
Both. We have a process of revaluation every 3 years, so we have to do it because it's the third year. But also, as we put each asset on the market for sale, we ask whichever agent wins the tender for doing the sale for us, we ask them to give us a valuation, which influences our guide price.
You said a few moments ago that you had achieved, I think, was it 5 million more than you've been expecting to?
Correct.
Disposal of the assets that you disposed of since 2012.
Correct.
I mean, is there an argument for maybe transferring assets to some other state entity rather than disposing of them in the market at this stage, if the prices are going up?
I mean, there is that argument, okay, and that is one of the issues that that we have looked at. The direction the board have given us is to dispose of the assets and to pay down the liabilities against the background that the properties that we're selling, we're getting reasonably good values for them at the moment. It's difficult to predict what way the market is going to continue to go, but at this particular point in time, we believe we can get fair values that will allow us to be actually able to dispose of the liabilities that we have.
Just if I could look at some of the notes then in the accounts. Note 1B talked about.
What page you on, Deputy?
Sorry, 2012 accounts. Not
2012 accounts.
Yeah, page 34. Note 1B.
Page 34. Just 1 second. Yeah.
And there was an impairment in 2012 of 2.08 million.
Correct.
What was that? What was that?
That was in relation to the CHQ building.
So that was the final impairment figure on the CHQ after.
Correct. So we had in 2011 we had the CHQ building valued at around 12 million. In the 2012 accounts, we took it down to 10 million, which was our estimate of what we would
Which is what you then
to
finally
dispose
sold
of
it
it,
at.
and we eventually sold
So
it.
the impairment in 2012 was for the CHQ before it was sold.
Correct.
Okay. And then there's a valuation surplus of 651,000.
And that relates to upward valuation of some of the investment properties we had in the Grand Canal Dock area.
Okay. And then there talks about a separate impairment in 2012 of 230,000. It's detailed in note 13, which is a site transfer to the Department of Education.
Correct.
At nil consideration.
Correct. That's an interstate transfer of a site that we had acquired under our Area and Social Regeneration Programme, which was to be developed as a special school. Obviously, with the wind-up order on the authority, that wasn't going to be something the authority was going to be able to continue to do. We entered into discussions with the Department of Education, who were a better fit from the state's point of view to continue to develop that. So we've transferred that across to the Department of Education.
Why was the transfer for free, though? Was there a commitment that the site was going to come into their ownership, or?
It was an interstate transfer, so we felt that there was no point in looking for value for it. It was better that they take on the project at that stage. This was a project that the authority had always planned to invest in. Okay, because it sits on our books as a kind of sort of a quasi investment asset, we ascribed a value to it. It was never the intention of the authority to sell this for profit.
Okay.
It was acquired.
It was never on the books as something that was going to make money for the authority.
No, it was designed to be an investment that we'd made to develop a school. There probably would have been significantly larger sums that would have been contemplated at the time to sell and develop it. It's effectively a derelict site.
Yeah, it comes in as a cost, though, to the authority.
Correct.
Yeah. Yeah. Has there been discussions with any other state agencies for taking property off your books at nil consideration?
At nil consideration, no.
No. Okay. Oh, just because, I mean, I understand that you might not have intended to make a profit from it, but the authority still makes a loss from it if it transfers it for free to the department. Was there ever a request to the department to pay?
I don't recall. Definitely, I wasn't involved directly in the negotiations. I'd need to just check with the files to see if there was a request to pay. As a starter for tenants and accountant, I would probably have always requested a payment.
Yeah.
Okay, but it was a social regeneration initiative, so I think it probably rested on that as the decision to transfer it.
And it would have been a decision of the board then ultimately to.
It was a decision of the board, yes.
Okay. If we can have the minutes from that meeting, it'd be interesting to see them. Thank you. If you don't mind. Just moving on then, sorry, to yeah, when we spoke briefly earlier about the properties not recognised in the balance sheet. Is that's included in the breakdown you gave me of the 9 million assets that you have?
Correct, Deputy.
And why is it that they're not recognised in the balance sheet?
There are two reasons for that. They break into two categories. There are some assets that we acquired for development, for public area development and infrastructure purposes. Okay, so in other words, we acquired the sites of typically, say, along the Campshires. Okay, along the Liffey, the authority would have acquired properties from time to time, which was they were effectively expensing those because they were buying them to knock them. Okay. Okay. And there's one asset that's on our books where, as it happens, that's not now going to happen. Okay, circumstances had changed.
What asset
so it's an asset in the Grand Canal dock area. It's an asset that's currently the subject to a sale. If you don't mind, I won't go into it. It's slightly commercially sensitive at the moment, but we will report it to the committee in the fullness of time. The rationale had changed over a period of time. So we had previously expensed the purchase of the asset as a cost. We now recognise that we may achieve some value for it commercially. So we've recorded it off balance sheet. There are a number of other assets in the infrastructure type of space. So I'll just give you an example of one. We have a comprehensive ducting network in the IFSC and in the Grand Canal Dock area, where we expensed the development of that. That actually has a commercial value because we actually commercially rent that. So we recognise that has a commercial value. So we value that on a multiple of the rent that we achieve on it on an annual basis. Okay, so they're the two principal sort of things. There's a number of other smaller items.
Thank you. And moving on into note 5 on page 37, or sorry, 36, the operating expenses. In 2012, just want to look at legal fees there for a second, 1.2 million.
Yes.
Now, I think just roughly under $1 million was for the defence of the IGB case, was it?
In 2012, just under $1 million was on the defence of the IGB case.
And what was the remainder then for? There was other litigation.
There was on the legal. Okay, so you're looking for analysis of the 1.2 million. Yeah, that's fine, Deputy. Okay, so there's approximately $1 million on the Donatics case. There's approximately 135,000 on another case that we're involved in. It's a provision against a case. There's approximately 70,000 on debt collection. Okay, and then there's approximately $500,000 on the cost of the in-house legal team that we have in place, and there was some HR advice for 30,000, and then there was miscellaneous other advices. There were small 2,000 to 3,000 bills for approximately 30,000.
There's an in-house legal team. I thought
Yes.
I thought you had consultancy for your legal. You required your legal services outside of the authority.
So it is consult. We call it to distinguish it, I suppose, from the external solicitors who are involved in cases. We have in-sourced the legal team, which is an external service.
But you've brought it into.
Brought it in, correct.
Okay. And who did you bring that in from? Which firm?
Do you want to take that?
That's McInerney Solicitors. They're engaged through an open tender process.
And were they engaged for all litigation for the authority or just the IGP case?
They currently provide all legal advice and services to the authority.
Okay. In relation to the defence of the Irish Catholic site, we weren't, or the authority wasn't awarded costs, was it?
We were, yes, but,
They're
unrecoverable.
Okay. And how does that get? I mean, how does that get treated then? If you're awarded costs but you can't recover them, is it?
We treat them as an expense, so we've written them off as an expense.
Okay. And then if we look at note 25, this talks about contingent liabilities in respect of certain legal matters. And you mentioned earlier that we've dealt with a number of legal matters since 2012. Have we still got contingent liabilities in that area?
We do, Deputy. I mean, we have there's approximately 16 cases at the moment that are in the legal or quasi-legal sphere. They're not necessarily all in court. We're working hard to try and make sure that some of them don't get into court, and they would range from title issues to dispute issues to enforcement of contract type of issues. To the extent, Deputy, that we consider that there are either costs associated with those or indeed potential settlements associated with those, we have already settlements on those. We've already reflected those in the accounts, and they will have anything we're working on at the moment has already been reflected in the accounts that you're looking at in 2012. Okay, there's very little or nothing new in 2013.
You put a provision in 2012 to account for potential money that would have to be.
Correct. Some of them could have been in earlier years, Deputy. Some of these things could have been running for a number of years.
Okay. And in terms of the winding up of the authority, I mean, can the authority wind up while these cases are still outstanding, or these issues?
Can you?
Yes, we believe that they would transfer over to the City Council to deal with the continuation of any cases that were still outstanding.
And that'll be part of the legislation that will come through because it will have to take on
its... we're working on with the City Council at the moment so that they can come up to speed with the different issues.
Okay, and so then the City Council becomes the body that's defending then the issues, or? As
the successor to the authority, that's the way we expect it to turn out.
Okay, thank you. Just if I could just briefly look at then other expenses that are detailed in note 7 on page 38. You had administrative expenses of 354,000 and depreciation and impairment of tangible fixed assets of 483,000 in 2012. What are the current figures for that?
The current figures, the majority, by the way, of the administrative expenses, over 50% of that relates to bank fees, Deputy.
Fees, okay.
Okay, which is a negotiation fee that we have to pay to the bank. Okay, let's find draft 2013 numbers in terms of operating expenses. They are. Let me just make sure I'm comparing like with like. Bank fees are expected to be very little or nothing, and general admin expenses about 122,000, I believe, so significantly lower, about a third of the cost in 2012.
And our facility expenses at 260,000, would they still be the same? Is that?
The facility expenses will continue to be in or around the same, because the significant part of that is insurance, public liability type insurance. Lighting included in that is, I mean, it sounds like an awful lot of money for lighting. The lighting includes lighting up the campshires, so it includes lighting some of the public utilities, which are run off our account.
So the total figure for then other expenses as of, say, end of 2013 would be, was just 1.1 million in 2012.
It will be, including depreciation, it'll be just short of $1 million, Deputy. The depreciation charge will be a good bit higher. It'll be about 100,000 higher, because some of the fixed assets that we have prudently just written them down to zero in our 2013 accounts, because we're just not clear at this stage as to what's going to happen those. Just depending on what happens with the authority's premises and Custom House Quay, etc., we may need to revisit that number, but we've just taken the conservative view at this stage that they may have reached the end of their useful life.
What kind of assets are you talking about?
The significant asset cost that the authority moved back into those premises, I think about two years ago, and had to refurbish the property at a cost, I think, of about 300,000 or 400,000 euros, and we were depreciating that refurbishment cost over a number of years. We probably were depreciating that over about 5 years. So we've speeded that up to completely write it off, on the assumption that we're not sure as to what's going to happen to that building post the wind up of the authority. As I said, that's a fluid number. It's about 100,000 or 150,000.
So you've just been conservative in that estimate.
Correct.
And it might come back and be...
Supposing it was to continue as an operating building,
yeah.
Okay, we probably wouldn't write that off. Our successor would then probably just take over that depreciation charge and then just write that off over what they consider to be the remaining useful life.
Okay, thank you. And then just, jumping back to note 5A, bad and doubtful debts. There was a write-off in 2012 of 865,000 in bad debt. Does that pertain to legal fees?
No, it's not actually, Deputy. It relates to it substantially relates to a loan that the authority had issued. It's broadly in the space of the CHQ property. Okay, I won't go into the exact details. It's because I don't want to mention a particular tenant. Okay, but it relates to loans that have been provided for refurbishment of properties which are not now recoverable, and they were effectively reflected in the sale price of the property that we achieved. So we've passed that debt on to the new owner.
Okay, but you issued a loan to someone who owned a property in the authority's area.
Who leased a property.
Leased a property. And what was the purpose of the loan? To
assist them in refurbishing the premises.
Okay, with a view to continuing that lease, but then they couldn't continue the lease, and so they couldn't.
No, it's a continuing operation, and they were repaying that loan. Indeed, they had been making repayments on that loan, but we effectively sold the loan with the property.
Okay.
Okay, so it was treated as a loan in our books. So from an accounting point of view, we recorded the CHQ transaction in its simplest terms as a 10 million sale proceeds and approximately an 800,000 loan write-off.
Okay.
So our net gain out of that transaction was about 9.2 million.
Okay. And is that, I see what you did there. So effectively, I mean, when we talk about the asset value of the CHQ when it was sold, yes, you were selling it for 9 million rather than 10 in terms of its valuation, or?
in terms of its...
I mean, was CHQ
yes,
valued at 10 million or 9 million? So
it was, CHQ was valued at, well, it was very difficult to get a valuation on it. I mean, we had valuations that were ranging from much, much lower numbers, to be honest with you, Deputy. I mean, potentially half of what we'd anticipated it to be. In our view, we anticipated that we would achieve net approximately 9 million for it. And in any forecast that we produced, we'd recorded it as a 10 million asset on the balance sheet, and then we'd made a provision against the loan for the 800,000.
okay, so you were anticipating selling it for 9 million, but you sold it for 10 and used that extra money to then write off the loan as a bad debt. But when you actually entered into negotiation with the person who was buying from you, were you entering into it on those terms?
Yes, it was. It was a tender type of process, and we had provided information to the short list of people who were making bids on the property, and one of the details that was provided to them, okay, was that we were asking them to take over
The loan.
the loan.
Okay.
So they had to price that into the transaction.
Okay, thank you. And in terms of then the banking facilities that the authority now has, you used the sale of the CHQ, the proceeds, to settle that liability.
Correct.
Okay. And does the authority now have a banking facility, a loan, an outstanding loan?
Oh, as a matter of fact, it's in cash surplus at this stage.
Cash surplus. That's sorry, you missed that earlier on.
It's in cash surplus. We don't need banking facilities at this stage.
Okay. And so as it stands then, end of 2013, interest payable on bank loans was 473,000 in 2012. That figure is not going to exist.
Correct. Yeah, there will be no bank fees other than processing charges. But there's no fee for maintaining a loan, and there will be no bank interest. There'll be surplus bank interest. It will be reasonably modest.
Okay. Jumping ahead then, just to note 14 on page 41 relates to debtors. And we've got a list of totals 3.8 million. Trade debtors, can you just explain to me who's covered under that 3.2 million?
Okay. That 3.2 million of debtors is monies that are due in from developers for development levy contributions, which are in turn payable to the Railway Procurement Agency. So they are included in both debtors and they are included in creditors. Okay, so they're on both sides of our balance sheet. And the reason for that, Deputy, is that we are the legal authority that is obliged to collect the levies for both the authority and the RPA. Okay, so we record them as receivables, and then we also record them as payables. That debtor number, and you'll see in the note underneath, is net of some provisions that we have made. Okay, I think you'll see a number there of about 5.9 million. So that 5.9 million, a substantial part of that also relates to development levies that are due, but they're due to the authority for the authority's account.
What's the difference between then, I mean, what's the figure for what's owed to the authority separate from what the authority is collecting for someone else?
There's about 4 million.
4 million. And just so on the first point then, when you're responsible for collecting levies for other authorities, that responsibility will transfer to Dublin City Council?
To the extent that they are uncollected.
Right.
At the date of transfer, and that we're working hard to make sure that that won't be the case.
And what about the 4 million that's owed directly to the authority?
It's the same. It's the same number of people that we're dealing with. So in other words, the debtors that we're pursuing a deputy owe levies to both us and to the RPA. So it's effectively the same case. Okay. So to the extent that we can recover on those liabilities, okay. Some of those funds will be for our own account, and some of them will be for the RPA's account.
And how are you pursuing those debts?
Through a combination of the legal process and enforcement. Okay. We're working with a number of receivers at the moment.
Who's covering the cost for that? Is it a shared cost with, say, the RPA, or is it?
In some cases, it's a shared cost with the RPA. The RPA are underwriting their portion of the legal fees.
Okay. And then just as a final point, Chair, note 22 talks about the joint ventures and subsidiary undertakings. What are those?
There's only one substantial substantial operation here, Deputy, and it relates to the management company that we operate in the Grand Canal Dock area. So when we acquired the gasometer site and created the Grand Canal Dock area, we created a management company in that area, as we had previously done in the original IFSC and then subsequently in the North Lots area. And the process is that we set it up, we build it out, and then we transfer the management company to the owners of the property in the area. We still haven't completed that project for the Grand Canal Dock area. It was, when the economic tsunami hit, that process slowed, development stopped. And we are now in the process of winding up, we're not actually winding up the company, we're in the process of winding up our interest in that company, which will necessitate disposing of our shares in that company. So that's the substantial entity that's referred to in note 22. The authority has, for legal reasons, one or two other small entities that it uses for title purposes.
And when you dispose of them, then the shareholdings, is that disposing it to another state agency, or?
No, to the owners of the property in the area,
okay,
as envisaged by the planning scheme for that area, which is exactly the same as what's happened on the north side.
Okay, thank you. And then just the final area I wanted to look at, just with relation to NAMA. When you were settling with NAMA in terms of the Irish glass bottle site, you transferred 7.85 million worth of assets to settle your liabilities. Excuse me. I mean, do you know what the asset value is for the properties you transferred at the time? That's 7.85. Do you know what it is now?
Do I know what the asset value is now for those properties we've transferred over?
Yeah.
I'm sorry, Deputy, I wouldn't know that NAMA would be.
Properties at all anymore?
We're not involved with those properties. No, they're under the control of NAMA.
Okay.
As I understand, they are all substantially still in the control and ownership of NAMA.
Okay.
I think only one of them has been disposed of.
Okay, thank you. And then just before, I know Deputy Nationals looked at the important issues in relation to the exceptions in the auditors report. Just to be clear again, once the on-board Planola reports on the SDZ, the only thing that's outstanding then is the legislation.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. And, I mean, have you, given your interaction with the department in the last couple of months in terms of what the legislation might include, have you got any understanding as to when that legislation will be in train?
No, I'd have to ask the department that. But in terms of the SDZ, the target date for on-board Planola that they have published is the 10th of April.
10th?
Yeah.
Okay.
At the moment, we're preparing draft heads to go to government, and we would hope to have that done very shortly, within the month. And given government approval around this time and some drafting issues, we would hope to have it enacted before the summer recess.
That's the intention at the moment.
Yeah. So,
And at that point, the authority ceases to exist. Okay.
or depending on where we are, there could be a date. The minister could appoint a date.
In the legislation, at which point it would cease to exist.
At which point it would cease to exist.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.